shifting gears to talking about specifically Daily Journal and why
Mhm.
you are excited about Daily Journal. This company has
Mhm.
been around for a long time. I think, as you guys listeners will understand, and some people probably do know this company already. But this is very, very stacked company when it comes to management. I think when it comes to business model, it's evolved quite a bit from what it used to be. So I think you'll find that surprising. So Matt, why don't you kind of walk us through why you find Daily Journal interesting?
Yeah, and I'll caveat this with a few things. So typically we don't talk about holdings because it creates this commitment and consistency bias. Usually, the feedback you receive if you're a fund manager and you talk about holdings is everybody who disagrees with you, and especially when you're in a value community, you're usually making some contrarian position, and so it's very easy because you're doing the opposite of what the herd is doing. It's very easy. So then what happens is everybody disagrees, and you defend yourself, and you end up just pounding in the ideas in your head. And if you then ever want to change your mind, it becomes very difficult.
Yeah.
And so typically that's the approach. I've actually made the decision with Daily Journal to discuss it to some degree for several reasons. One of them being um, I don't mind pounding it into my head because it's truly a multi-decade compounder. I'm not pitching something that's going to double tomorrow. I'm telling you about a firm that has that fits all of the criteria so clearly, that is going to that is in a space that has so much potential, that if you can understand and do the sort of diligence that we did, and I'll share some of it with you, you can see that there's just massive future cash flows coming, and they don't exist today, and they didn't exist in the past, and so the financial statements are totally misleading, which um, which makes this a huge mystery to most people, and that's what created some of the interest for me. So do you want me to jump into I mean, I
Yeah,
can walk through
please.
the thesis. And by the way, folks can go to our website, which is petersonfunds.com, or there's some YouTube stuff where you can see some more detail, because I'll try and go quick. Uh, so I've been attending in LA, so I found that this isn't on the 13F analysis. So actually step one doesn't work either. So,
Step
uh,
one and step three are out. This is a unique
right.
case.
So those are still enormously valuable, and they probably helped me find this. So, this is Charlie Munger's firm. 40 years ago or something, Charlie Munger and Rick Guerin bought a newspaper and called Daily Journal for $2 million. And over the decades, they ended up with 10 million newspapers, and then they started an equity portfolio inside. And the equity portfolio has grown significantly. And I've been attending these Daily Journal meetings because it's Charlie Munger, and there's about 1,000 groupies that fill this conference room in LA each year. And they don't even talk about the company. It's just Q&A, and nobody asks about Daily Journal. People want to know about Stoic philosophy and all sorts of other things.
Mhm.
So Charlie talks briefly about a few aspects, and one thing he started mentioning was this very obscure subsidiary, Journal Technologies, that was operating a big space and providing, he didn't really even say this, but it's providing court and government agency software solutions, and it's a SaaS business essentially. So I became interested and started asking. Usually my first stop is to ask all my buddies who are also fund managers, and nobody had any clue. And that becomes interesting. Usually, I think I mentioned the other episode, what Kaufman always says, who's on the board of Daily Journal, that where there's mystery, there's margin. And this is a clear example of um, there being a lot of mystery. And so after trying to find out what they were creating, and not being able to, there's this another uh, sort of analogy I like. It's like the map is not the terrain. And so you look at the financial statements, and it's like, okay, this is a map of what the company is, but what is the company really? What I ended up finding was that there was a customer training conference going on in Utah. And so I couldn't get in because I didn't have court IDs or government credentials. And But I realized, believe it or not, there's not a huge demand to go to a customer training conference. So I just booked a room in the hotel and I sat in the lobby for 3 days and I interviewed all of the customers as they were going between their rooms and things. And what I learned was amazing. I learned everything. Came back understanding that the revenue is totally missing from the financial statements. The number one thing that I learned for the time we have here is that they are going through a multi-year RFP and implementation process with their software. This is not a newspaper business at all. This is a technology firm, and their software requires 4 to 7 years to go live with a new customer and client. And part of their competitive advantage and part of their moat, because of the management teams involved, is that they don't bill a penny until go live. So there are contracts for sometimes hundreds of thousands, in some cases tens of millions of dollars. Those are like 10-year contracts, and they're totally missing from the financial statements. However, all of the costs of these implementations are on the financial statements. So just a brief background, what do we have to do? We had to go county by county across America and look from their perspective and try to figure out, does anybody owe Daily Journal money? And we found so much money. LA owes them $5 million. Austin, Texas owes them $1 million. I was able to uncover over 100 contracts. Australia has one contract for $89 million, a second contract for $16 million. Okay, so Daily Journal itself is a 450, call it, market cap firm. And inside of Daily Journal, they actually have their equity portfolio, which primarily consists today of BYD stock, but it's mostly unchanging. Charlie bottom ticked it to the day in 2009, and it's been BYD and a few banks. And it's worth $311 million. Plus, they have $27 million in cash, and they own 3 office buildings, which on the balance sheet they hold at 17, but if you do comparables, it's like 33 million. So all of these fairly liquid assets, and then the real estate bucket, and actually keep the financial, everything's conservative. So keep the real estate at the price they market at, it's something, it's 355. So 310, give or take, for the equity plus cash and real estate. So they're at 355, and then they have debt. The funny thing about the debt is that it's such a weird dynamic. It's all mostly 60 million of it long-term deferred capital gains tax. So non-callable. They never have to pay it until they sell their securities, which they're not really selling. 0% interest. I mean, it's sort of debt, but if you really think about it, if they're going to pay that amount in 10 years, you'd actually sort of discount that debt, right? So the 60 million in that debt. They have a $30 million margin loan that they borrowed at 3% to service and start this whole technology company. And then they have a sliver of like $1.5 million in real estate mortgages. So out of the 355 in assets, they have 90 in debt. And so, call it 265 or so on a 450 million market cap firm. Daily Journal, the technology piece, is under 200 million bucks. And I will tell you, with all the missing revenue, they have 35 million in revenue today. So you're taking a SaaS business run by which is the greatest business model today in this economy. I mean, it's up there for sure. And it's run by the icons of the business world. In fact, their newest board member, if any of your viewers have read The Outsiders, Thomas Murphy was the CEO of Capital Cities ABC. And all of this stuff is very secretive. But Mary Conlin just joined the board. And it took me 6 months of passive searching until I came across a wedding invitation from the 90s and realized that Mary Conlin was born Mary Murphy. She married John Conlin. And actually, that's Tom Murphy's daughter, who was 1 when he took over Capital Cities ABC. And she went to Harvard and she ran all these business, and she was a star at Warner Brothers and Pixar. And now she's on the board with Charlie Munger and Peter Kaufman. I'm like, that sounds wonderful.
Wow.
So she's retired, 56. She's running the company now and on the board as well. Um, and and so look, it's you've got these amazing folks running the business under 200 million. They have 35 million in revenue. So you're getting all of this at 5 times revenue, and the revenue's missing. It's just a no-brainer. It's like just a no-brainer. And I actually, I'm not trying to pitch it at all. I want to buy more. I don't mind the price being low. But there's something else that's very interesting, and this is a way that I approach a lot of our investments, is that I'm looking for a lot of asymmetry in the potential outcome, because everything has probabilistic futures. There is a possibility that the technology totally fails, and it's not really possible, but it's, let's just say something terrible happens. But if it totally fails, I look at this scenario with the 310 or 11 million market cap portfolio, plus a few of these other aspects. Plus, by the way, we're putting all their 10 newspapers at zero. It's not really at zero, but even the equity portfolio will compound into the current market cap of Daily Journal over the next, say, 5 years. So if you give yourself a 5-year time horizon, I think either the technology is really working, or you have an equity portfolio, so your downside becomes so muted. So you get a very muted downside and an upside that can go totally parabolic. By our conservative models, we expect about 100 million in revenue annually in 2030. And Tyler Technology is their biggest competitor. They sell for 15 times revenue. They're huge. They do all sorts of other things other than just courthouse SaaS management. They're also in public school systems and adoption agencies and everything else. A place where Daily Journal could potentially go, but they don't need. The space is so big and so underrepresented that they have like 2 decades of runway before the market starts to get saturated. But even at that point, they could branch off into all sorts of different activities. So anyway, if you have 100 million in revenue in a decade and you give it a very reasonable multiple, maybe it's 10 or 12, you've kind of got a billion or $1.2 billion business, and then you've got a portfolio that's probably compounded. So I don't mean to keep going on here, but you'll be in a situation, I think, where you have a $1.5 billion or $2 billion market cap coming from 400 and change today. And it's really, the risk reward is so attractive. Mm-hmm. You can just sit back and compound at double-digit returns for a long period of time.
Mm. It's interesting. It's interesting the hidden, like you said early on, the mystery. Mystery is where the alpha lies, and here you have a company that's trading market cap of 450, but if you really peel the onions, the core technology business is 200, being very conservative. 200 market cap, trading at 5 times revenue, and you have a competitor just on an immediate short-term time horizon. You have a competitor that's trading at 15 times revenue.
That's right. And so, I'll share with you, and this is not to be derogatory in any way, but Charlie makes these comments. He says things that you can go look at the transcripts of the Daily Journal meetings, and there will be few sentences on this business. And he'll say something like, well, it's not our business to judge the competition publicly, but we do wish that all of our competitors in all of our businesses were like Tyler Technology, which is sort of a backhanded way of saying we're in a government bureaucratic environment. And I think if you are pretty good, you can go really far, because you're not in Silicon Valley. You're in a courthouse in Missouri trying to compete for their technology space.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine in terms of competitive advantage, like the switching cost here is absolutely enormous. Once you install of these things, it's just going to be such a pain to rip those out. So lifetime value of a customer. Go ahead.
Yeah, I will share with you that first of all, when I went to the conference, I thought I'm going to a tech conference.
Mm.
So I need to get some tennis shoes. I need to be, hip. And, and I showed up, and what I realized was it was more like going to the DMV or some sort of government, not in a terrible way, but in um, a lot of the customers they're wonderful people, um, but they are also working for a pension, for example. It's a different level of ambition in that group, and um, the reason I'm saying that is that they are very happy to learn this software once, but I cannot emphasize the switching costs run so deep. It goes to the employee's rejection of any willingness to switch.
Mhm.
10 years in, it's going to be very, very difficult from a technological standpoint to rip it out. It's going to be very difficult from a cultural perspective to
Mhm.
rip it out.
Mhm.
So if Tyler gets it, Tyler gets it. And if Journal gets it, Journal gets it. And I think it's there to stay. Most of the nation is very fragmented, and internationally very fragmented. So a local IT provider got a contract in the 90s or early 2000, and they built out something, but it's going to be usually has a lot of bugs, and it functions, but it doesn't do the same. It's not anywhere near the type of quality of what Journal Technologies provides. Hey, it's great to see you here. If you enjoyed that video, I'm sure you're going to love this next one we put together. We'll see you there.